Crossroads, so glad to see you guys today. My name is Pastor Brian Hunt, and I'm the lead pastor here at Crossroads. I'm so glad that you tuned in for this special message. And I say special because this message is only available right here. There's no live version because this is something new. We're giving you the chance to find out more about this upcoming series before it even happens. Think of this as your pre-workout before the actual series begins. And our hope is that this will help you be even more dialed in to understand the series we're about to tackle, which is the Gospel of John. So the fact that you're here means that you're ready to dive in and know more about the journey we're about to take, so good for you. Have you ever found yourself on the outside looking in on an inside joke? Like maybe you're in a car full of people who are all high school friends, except for you. You're the new guy in the group, and as you're driving, all of a sudden they start laughing when Bop from Hanson comes on the radio. You have no idea why. And you decide to laugh nervously just in case, and it only makes things worse because they know that you don't know why you're laughing, and you know that you don't know why you're laughing, and it's all because you're not sure what's going on. We want to avoid that with this series, so we're going to pull everyone in from the story from the very beginning so we can all sing the song together. So to start off, we need to take a step back and consider, what does it mean to have something to be a gospel? Well, the first 4 books of the New Testament are called Gospels. They're Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the word gospel comes from the Greek word, which is evangelion, which means good news. So those gospel accounts are sharing the good news of Jesus. There are 3 gospels that are known as the synoptic gospels. It's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're considered synoptic, which means similar or seen together, because as you read them, they seem to be coming from a very similar vantage point. And scholars are not 100% in agreement about it, but many believe that Mark was written first, and Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source text, thus giving them a synoptic congruency. This doesn't take anything away from them or their authenticity or their overall effectiveness in the authority of their message, but rather it creates a synthesis of thought that bridges them together. However, that leaves the Gospel of John as in a class by itself. John was believed to be written last and does not seem to pull from any of those other Gospels. In other words, it stands alone in its account of Jesus' life. Either through direct reference in the text or through scholarly research, the synoptic gospel authors, they're all but assured. We know who they are. We know that the Gospel of Luke was written by a physician and a historian by the name of Luke, who's identified as such in the very first verse of his book. The Gospel of Mark is written by a man known as John Mark, or Mark, who is part of Paul's ministry and would have had firsthand interaction with the first 11 disciples. Now, history has all but confirmed that Mark was actually the penman of the book, as he's recounting the life of Jesus according to the Apostle Peter. And Peter, he was one of the 3 closest men to Jesus during his ministry. The Gospel of Matthew, it's been held that the disciple Matthew was most certainly the one that wrote this book. And the earliest manuscripts of Matthew date all the way back to 175 AD, which reveals the full title of the book, that was the Gospel according to Matthew, so Matthew wrote it. No other extra biblical or biblical sources have ever refuted Matthew's authorship, so we believe that to be true. But interestingly enough, the Gospel of John's authorship is not found until the second to last verse of John, where it says, "This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true." Jesus had 3 of the 12 disciples that he considered closer than any of the others. That was Peter, James, and John. They were with him at all the major events in his ministry, including the Mount of Transfiguration, where Jesus' his glory was revealed. But it is widely known throughout biblical scholarship that the disciple John was the one that Jesus loved the most. Therefore, the author identifies himself in those verses we were just reading, and so it's safe to assume that John was the one that wrote this gospel account. Now, another important piece to note in this Gospels is who they were written to. Again, keep in mind, these were letters, not books, that were written. So just like any other letter that would be addressed to someone, you would want to make sure you were sending it to the right person. So who these gospel letters were written to, or the audience they were meant for, is very important. Luke was written to the Roman governor Theophilus. Matthew was written primarily for a Jewish audience, specifically the Syrian and the Palestinian Jews. And Mark was written to a Gentile audience that was both Christian and Roman. But as with everything else, John was written to an eclectic audience. His gospel was the most theological of the four and was written to both Jew and Gentile, meaning it had the widest application, which is often why many people encourage new believers to start by reading the Gospel of John over the other three, as it seems to have the ability to speak to the largest group of readers. But another important question to ask is, who in the heck is John? I mean, it's one thing to know he wrote the letter, but who is he? See, I always feel that knowing something about someone is important to really getting to understand how they tick. It's even why when I interview people, I like to ask them questions outside of the four corners of the job description to really get to know them. Because I want to know them as a person to see if they might fit into the culture of our team. I'm sure you would agree this is true in your life too. You're friends with people not just because you both have the first name or something like that, but because of the interest you share. If you're married, there's a high probability it wasn't done through an arranged marriage. Most likely it was through dating that person and learning more about them, and then eventually you could see yourself with them forever. Now, great sports teams, they're formed when other people know each other so well that they can anticipate each other's move on the court or where they might be on the field at any given time. Knowing a person will help you understand better why they do what they do and what they mean by what they say. The same is true about the Gospel of John. First of all, we first meet John as John, the son of Zebedee. He and his brother James were both called sons of thunder by Jesus. So if we read between the lines of this nickname that Jesus gave them, it's safe to say that John started off more like a biker gang member than a prayer team member. Now, secondly, John was a Palestinian Jew, and he was said to have been a member of Jesus' inner circle. John most likely wrote the gospel account of Jesus between AD 70, which is when Jerusalem was besieged by the Romans and the temple was destroyed, and AD 100. It's the approximate end of John's lifetime, and we're going to talk more about that in a second. And what's amazing is that we have a fragment of the original Gospel of John as early as 200 AD, which is only 100 years removed from its original writing. And thirdly, one way we could see that Jesus was correct when he said that he loved John more than any of the other disciples was what happened right at the end of Jesus' life. While he's hanging on the cross, nearing the time that he would give up his spirit and die, he looks down off the cross at John, and he says this in John chapter 19. He says, when Jesus saw his mother there and the disciples whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. Needless to say, it has to be a very important and special person to you to entrust you with their mom. But if you add on top of that this is the earthly mother of the Son of God, woohoo, yikes, that's some pressure. But John did, in fact, take care of Jesus' mother, and he moved her to the city of Ephesus, where she lived out the remainder of her years. Which brings me to the next point that we should consider about John. It's that he lived in Ephesus, which was one of the most important urban centers of the entire Roman Empire. Some historians believe he chose to live there to assume the leadership of the growing church community there after Peter and Paul were martyred for their faith in Rome. But some also say that he chose it because he just enjoyed writing there, which is also would make sense that since we know that John wrote the gospel from Ephesus, it makes sense he probably liked to write there all the time. Now, Ephesus is also important in John's story because it's the place in which he died. But it did not come restfully, to say the least. According to the historian Tertullian in the 2nd century, he was a historian from North Africa, John was ordered boiled in oil by Emperor Domitian, but he survived miraculously. Domitian then banished John to the island of Patmos, where he also hoped that he would die, but even in that, God used it for his glory. Listen to what he says in Revelation chapter 1, verse 9. It says, "I, John, your brother and companion, in the suffering and kingdom and patient endurance that ours in Jesus was on the island of Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus." Because on that island is where John received the revelations of Jesus and wrote what we know as the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, the revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant, John. John was on the island of Patmos until Emperor Domitian died, which is around 1 to 3 years. Upon returning to Ephesus, though, he was sentenced to home confinement, but he was able to spend the rest of his days in peace until he died at the old age of about 99 in 100 AD. Ironically enough, though, John was said to be the youngest of all the disciples, but he lived the longest and yet was the only disciple not martyred for his faith. Now, that's a lot. And some of you might say, why is this such a big deal to me understanding the Gospel of John? Well, what I want you to learn as you study the Bible is that all the little pieces are really crucial to the overall understanding of the message. It helps us connect to the scripture while also seeing God's work through broken people that are taking us to those places. If we simply approach the text as words on a piece of paper or a document akin to the Declaration of Independence, we miss the power of God, the power that He wants us to experience through it. The Bible is not a science book or a textbook, but the words of God meant to transform us to be more like Jesus with every word we read. And yet He allowed it to be written by normal people, broken people, interesting people that God spoke through to give us the Bible that we read today. But especially why I think it matters in John is that as you read the Gospel of John, we get to see Jesus through the eyes of someone that began their life with Him as a son of thunder, and after 3+ years with Him, turned into the disciple of love. Someone that was radically transformed by Jesus, and that Jesus ended up loving him so much that He would allow him to care for his mother. And it's a gospel that fast forwards past Jesus' birth and it gets right down to the guts of His ministry. He wants to show us what Jesus did and how the world was changed because of Him. He gives us Jesus' theology and humanity, passion and pain, habits and hurts, joys and sorrows, and He does it in a first-person perspective that is second to none. I think the Gospel of John is really shaped well by the verse that we'll be using for this entire series. It's actually what John records about his interaction that John the Baptist, who's Jesus' cousin, had with his followers in regards to this new Jesus that had just come on the scene. We'll talk through this more in a few weeks, but for now, I want you to consider this and keep in mind this is John's recording of this scene. In John chapter 3, it says, an argument developed between some of John's disciples and a certain Jew over the matter of ceremonial washing. They came to John and said to him, Rabbi, that man who is with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testify about, look, he's baptizing and everyone is going to him. To this John replied, a person can receive only what is given them from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said, I am not the Messiah, but am sent ahead of him. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine and is now complete. He must become greater and I must become less. Although these are John the Baptist's words, they very well could have been John's words himself. He realized through his transformation from son of thunder to disciple of love that whatever Jesus offers is way better than anything he could get for himself in this world. He saw that when he, John, became less and he, Jesus, became more in his life, he truly began to live. And John knew that this would not mean an easy life. In fact, John made sure to include Jesus' words about this in John 16:33. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. John knew firsthand about the world having trouble. He was boiled alive, banished to an island, and he was also poisoned. Oh, I didn't mention that earlier, did I? All those things, and then some, were in-your-face reminders that this world will be hard. But yet through Jesus being more and John being less, he learned that he could overcome anything through the Jesus that he loves so much. What you'll see throughout this series is how when we become less and Jesus becomes more, our lives are radically different. And as we walk through this gospel, we will also see how less Jesus is, as well as in so many ways, he's also more. That we will also see that he's boundless and selfless, relentless and blameless. His less is what causes us to want more of him in our lives and to see him not as a great speaker, philanthropist, or even social activist, but as God and the Savior of our souls. So here's what I want you to do before the first week of this series. Are you ready? Here's your walk this week. I want you to read John 1. I also want you to ask God to show you where he should be more and you should be less in your life. And then the last thing, invite a friend to join you in this journey through the Gospel of John. Guys, I'm so glad that you took the time to listen to this pre-message before our series in the Gospel of John begins. It's going to be so helpful. And I think that you should share it with your friends, maybe even a family member, maybe even your one who needs to hear it so they know what to expect when they come to church. You may even want to listen to this again just to soak in a few more details. But no matter what, we hope this helps you discover and follow Jesus even more fully in your life so you can one day lead someone to know him as well. We can't wait to see you for the start of this series, but until then, God bless you guys and tag you're it.